Welcome to our conversation with Chris Balme about his work and his book, Finding the Magic in Middle School. My name is Julie Mountcastle, and I'm head of school at Slate School in North Haven, Connecticut. Slate School is an independent 501c3 nonprofit K-12 school where education is focused on cultivating creativity, fostering ingenuity, and inspiring a deep passion for lifelong learning. At Slate School, we have formed a community that is constantly striving to improve practice, to create meaningful educational experiences for learners of all ages, and part of a growing movement to change the landscape in education. To that end, we are delighted to present the Education Idea Lab, which is a unique virtual series that is free and open to the public. Our Idea Labs convene leaders, changemakers, and participants from all sectors of education and innovation. So thank you all for joining us. We are so delighted to have you with us today. A little bit about our incredible guest. Chris Balme is an educator and dreamer and builder, and driven by a belief that we all have far more potential than we realize. Chris has built and led educational organizations from a national nonprofit serving youth in disadvantaged communities to a laboratory school in San Francisco working to create and share new educational methods based on developmental science, and a new project that we just heard about today. Chris also writes and speaks and trains on education topics. Thank you. And his book, Finding the Magic in Middle School, was published in 2022. And that is actually how we learned about Chris Balme. And we are so fortunate to have you with us tonight. Thanks so much, Chris.
My pleasure, Julie. Looking forward to the conversation. And as we were saying before, it's rare to have this chance to build a new school with these ideas woven in. So it's a great moment to be with you.
Thank you. Do you want to tell our friends here, everyone who's listening, a little bit about your current adventure? And then we'll sort of bounce back into some of the questions that I know our community has.
Yeah, so I guess maybe like you all, I have this love of helping new schools get started. I think we just need more, more innovation in this space. And sometimes it's easiest when you can start something fresh and then let other people hopefully take some useful ideas from that. So we have this rare freedom to create new schools and we should use it. So I'm helping a wonderful team in Japan launch a new international lab school, similar in some ways to the work at Millennium School that's in the book, but with some different twists, more nature-based, but trying to have this same idea of using developmental science to create kind of a fresh page to look at how school could be. So that's the quick version, and I'm happy to say much more.
Very, very exciting. Well, I mentioned Chris's book, and I'll show you right here. It's already well loved at Slate School. Um, in fact, I was telling Chris earlier that our school, our parents have a book club here run by our narrator, Kelly Campanelli. And this was the book that they went to. And so I have a lot of their questions and a lot of my own, and I'm sure we'll get some from the chat. So if you are watching, please send us your questions. We would love to entertain them. It's a rare opportunity to get to talk to someone whose work you've read, and I think someone who's produced a book that's probably going to be read and reread by a lot of educators and administrators and parents too, because this is such a powerful time in a child's life, and we probably don't really understand it the way we should.
Yeah.
I think I think there's so much to it, and we were talking before about how parenting is the most humbling job ever. And just the more information you get, the better you are able to navigate some of the things with your kids. And middle school is a time for real navigation. I was thinking in the book and sort of in life, elementary school, it's easy for us to characterize what that time is. It's sort of that opening of formal education. It's the beginning of being open to ideas around the world, nearby, far away. High school then seems also easier to characterize, I think. It's the deepening of things, it's reaching further, it's preparation for what's next. But middle school just kind of sits there stuck in the middle. And I think it kind of defies definition, really, almost, except for, I mean, we even call it middle school. I guess I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what those middle school years could be. What could it be?
Mm,
What could it be for kids?
yeah, thank you for that question. Maybe the way to start is just with a bit of a neuroscience frame, just to talk about what's possible here. Is I think so much, really, the reason I wrote the book is I think it's time to change the story about what middle school is. As my goodness, we are so stuck in this story that this is the worst time ever, and we tell our kids that, which is the
Yeah.
most unbelievable thing. And we've really got to flip that. Is it just, to me, it means we haven't understood it well. So, as a premise to answering that question, one of the neuroscience findings that I find most useful is that there are two periods in our lives when our brains are growing the fastest. Those are early childhood, roughly 0 to 5, and early adolescence, roughly 11 to 16. So we know about the first one. We people don't really talk about the second one as much. And with the first one, when we have a toddler, for example, at home, probably we've learned something about development. We have some idea, hopefully, of the phases they're going through. Otherwise, it would be so bewildering. And with middle school, often we don't have that kind of resource as parents or frankly as teachers either. So instead of seeing it developmentally as, oh yeah, this is that part of the phase and that's going to segue to this phase, we just use words like, oh, they're so hormonal or they're impossible. That just means, we're not setting the conditions right. So that's what's possible here, that this is the time in life when our brains open to the social world, when we have to completely rebuild our identity as social beings, and just simply when we get so much smarter. I mean, that's the core thing that's happening in middle school, are incredible leaps in your intelligence, all forms of it. So if we design schools well, and I can say more about what I think would be helpful for that, then we see kids who are jumping into, taking steps forward toward adulthood, jumping into new versions of themselves, and motivated, sincere, like actually looking you in the eye. When you see middle schoolers that are doing the opposite, where they're checked out and rolling their eyes and resentful, often that just means they feel like they can't do their real work here. And they're just kind of waiting for you to get out of the way almost. So we can do much better by them and kind of tap into that potential that's there. And I'll stop there for now, as I've said a lot, but I
That's
can say much more about what some of those pieces might be.
Well, I mean, I do have the question then, like what makes a good middle school then?
Yeah.
If you could whip up and maybe you've made it, right? You've made it and you're making it again. But what's in that brew? What
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. First ingredient is a sense of belonging. That for middle schoolers, if you remember again, like from a brain level, the biggest change is that all of the hardware that you and I have as adults to sense the social world around us, that just turned on for them. And so they're getting this massive amount of new information in. What is happening with that group? How are they including or excluding me? Who is ranked and what kind of status? And they're trying to make sense of that. And it's going to force them to rebuild themselves, from the core. So the very premise of anything good that happens in middle school is a sense of belonging. Because now that you realize you're in this big social world, if you don't feel like there's at least one group or even just one person that is kind of a stable point of contact, you're going to feel too threatened to tap into your own potential, to learn, to take positive risks. So beginning with belonging. Um, Next, I would say they need to have work that is worthy of them. So middle schoolers are getting really smart. They can kind of see through some adult things that before they maybe took at face value. In fact, literally, there are studies that show that their ability to read faces dramatically improves between elementary and middle school. Elementary schoolers, an adult can say one thing and emote a different thing, and they'll follow what is spoken, even if your face shows something different. Middle schoolers will not be fooled by that. They'll read your face, they'll wonder what kind of things are not being spoken. So all of that's just an example of it. They're getting much smarter. So we can't give them worksheets and busy work and, just kind of school that feels like babysitting. We have to help them do projects in the world that they actually care about. And that comes from their own passion or from seeing that adults out there, not the teachers or parents, but adults in the outer world actually care about this problem, or they struggle with it, or they're passionate about it. So a great middle school is connected to the world around it because there are lots of things in that world, how to make money, how to make change. All of those things are animating for middle schoolers, and they need contact with them to bring out their whole motivation.
Awesome. There's something you said in there. You're talking a little bit about kind of kind of hearing their struggles and having and allowing students to see maybe the struggles of grown people too. And you talk a little bit about it in the book about how we need to be more transparent with our kids so that they don't think they're the first people in the family to have a particular problem. I mean, a lot of the problems I had in middle school, unfortunately, I still somehow have many of them.
Yes,
I
me too.
continue to kind of deal with those, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, can you talk a little bit about how important it is to share that?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that we underestimate middle schoolers is by thinking that we have to hide a lot of ourselves. Or sometimes we're just in the habit of it because if it's our oldest kid, for example, we've been used to being the parent of a young child where we can be a little more like a boss, and we're not going to tell them about, our work colleague that just pissed us off. That may not make sense with a 5-year-old, but with a middle schooler, something like that might be exactly what they need to hear. For example, to normalize that adults still have conflict and that we do have tools. It's not something that, is the end of a relationship, and that we can have emotional swings and we survive that. And we even have ways to manage it and soften it. They need to see, and they're ready to see more of us. So, I think a lot of families, I've heard the story and experienced it to some extent in my own family that, if the parents are having an argument, they have it behind closed doors. And for sure, sometimes that's the right move, but sometimes you can actually reveal, like, we're having a struggle right now, or this is the emotion I'm feeling right now. As again, they're smart enough to pick it up anyways, but if they don't know why, they may leap to conclusions or make themselves stressed about it. When we line up what we're emoting all the time with what we're saying, then they can trust us and they feel like we're trusting them by showing that we get they're capable of more.
Yeah, and I could see how it would be really awful for kids to be in a position to sense the disharmony and not see it.
Yeah.
Just sort of existing in the penumbra. It would be very unsettling, especially to someone whose sensor's just been turned on.
Yeah, I think one of the hallmarks of middle school is high perception skills because they're picking up all this stuff now they didn't before, but low interpretation skills, which is not their fault. It just means they haven't had a lot of cycles of receiving that kind of data.
Yeah,
So you and I walk down the hall and we see someone with a weird look. We're less likely to take it personally, probably. We think, oh, something's going on with them or they have a stomach ache, whatever. A middle schooler who's just picking this information up for the first time might catastrophize it and think, oh God, that I did something wrong or my social life is about to be over. So
right.
they're just working on that interpretation skill, but their perception skills have suddenly got to close to adult level. So it's a big leap to
It's a
make.
big leap. When I look, so I have two daughters. They're 23 and 25 now. But when I look back on their middle school experience, I wish I had found the superpower of being unoffendable.
Yeah, yeah. That's hard. That's a tall
It's a
order.
hard one because they know the buttons to push because they're sensitive and they see it. But I feel like I could have helped them, in those moments with them. I don't have to be unoffendable in life, but
Yeah,
if
yeah,
I had been unoffendable with them, it would have been helpful. Say, will
yeah.
you talk a little bit about the peer effect?
Yeah, so the peer effect is this really fascinating body of research that is, I think, in some ways showing that it's more powerful than peer pressure, which is often what people worry about, and especially around reckless behavior that adolescents are prone to. So the peer effect, I'll explain it with this metaphor. So if you imagine that you are, going to dinner with someone who is a dear friend, maybe you haven't seen them in a while, and you're just really enjoying their company. then experiencing that one kind of reward will make the next reward even more appealing. So at that great dinner, you're more likely to, order dessert when maybe you wouldn't always otherwise, or have a second glass of wine or whatever it might be. And that's something called reward priming, that one form of reward makes the next one even kind of juicier to us. So enter middle schoolers, their brains are sensitized to learn about the social world more than anything else. It's probably the most important time in our lives for social learning. So that means is anytime they're around a peer, it's highly rewarding, meaning they're activated by it. And when they're already activated by one reward, the reward priming rule means it's going to make the next reward even juicier. So middle schoolers and high schoolers are more likely to do something reckless because they think it'll be fun. It'll kind of give even more energy to a peer connection than necessarily peer pressure, which can also happen, of course. But what I find useful in remembering this rule is that I think it lets us adults take things less personally. Because, if you are a middle schooler and you've got both peers and adults in the same space, you're not really choosing to ignore the adults so much as your brain is just making the peers extremely enticing. So it's almost like, the adults are coming through in black and white and we're talking in subtitles, and peers are like full color surround sounds, just grabs your attention. So for us as parents or teachers to realize like they're not usually trying to ignore us so much as their peers have just become incredibly interesting. And it's smart that they are, because these are the people they're going to spend the rest of their lives with. They're going to work together, partner with. They really should be learning about how to be around their peers. And we want to get out of their way so they can actually get all the learning possible.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. That's so great. So I have a question here from our community, and I'm skipping a lot of steps here, and I want to kind of cycle back to some other things, but in talking about the social life of students, it's inevitable now that we talk about social media,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a powerful tool. You write about why it's so appealing. And I think it's good for us to remember that. So maybe you could share a little bit about why it's just such a fascination for kids, but I mean it is for us too.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, I think, nice to join them exactly like you
Yeah, we
say.
all
We
struggle with kind
we all
of
struggle with it.
understanding our relationship with that.
Yeah, yeah. And this is probably the most controversial thing that's in the book, in that I don't believe social media is evil. I just think it's an intensifier of existing human dynamics. So it's incredibly appealing and it has all kinds of traps, but that is in many ways just the nature of humans figuring out how to be around other humans. And what I think is one of the most appealing things from an adolescent's perspective is, in many ways, they are identity scientists, you could call them. They're trying to, excuse me, run as many experiments as they can to figure out what sticks. Like, what is my authentic sense of self? And if they can come out of middle school with some clarity that this is who I really am, even if I'm not being rewarded for it, even if it's not cool, like that is one of the greatest gifts they could possibly develop in that time. So, enter social media. It's a space where there's every possible identity available to explore. And that has some of its traps, but also that has some of its appeal, and it's genuinely valuable. Now, it depends a lot on each kid when they're ready to enter that space, and I think they need a lot of preparation and clear agreements, and there's lots we could say about that. But I think we can't totally ignore that there is real value in it for them to explore identities, figure out what makes sense to them, maybe make friends that they don't have the possibility of making in person. Yeah, there are some goods, to balance all the known problems with it.
Yeah, so yes to all of that, and I hear that, and I hear it from kids all the time too. It's fun, it's it's diverting. I can be with friends in a different way.
Right.
So many valuable things. Um, but I wonder if you have some advice to us as parents about how do we set some parameters that that don't seem invasive,
Yeah.
but support our young socializers.
Yeah, well said. Well, the first kind of rule of thumb that I think of with this is that there's research that shows that the kids who have good quality in-person relationships are much less likely to fall into the traps of online life in different ways, whether it's addiction to social media or kind of addiction to comparing themselves to others. In other words, the better their real life relationships, the more protected they are. And conversely, the kids who don't feel like they have any good friends in person are much more prone to being desperate and finding whatever they can online.
Mhm.
So I think from a parent's perspective, the first thing to think about is the quality of your child's in-person relationships, which doesn't mean they need to be a popular kid. It just means, one or two friends that are consistent, that they trust, that don't reject them, suddenly that they can be open around. If they have that already, they're better equipped to go into the online world. Um, the second piece is I think you can make agreements that apply to both of you, to both the parents and the kid.
Oh, okay.
So, which is often it helps us empathize with their perspective on it, because truly a lot of us struggle with it so much. How to not compare ourselves or feel bad we don't have something that we see on social media, or not check our phone 100 times a day. So we can't really tell them not to and then model the opposite of that. They're way too smart for that. So, the best I've ever seen at Millennium School, we did a project where a group of, I think it was sixth and seventh graders, took in all the research they could find about social media and phone addiction, and then they created a parent education night where they basically told parents how to handle their own phone addiction. And in the course of that, they also proposed some rules that they thought should apply to everyone in the school, adults and kids. And ever since then, we've had, for example, a policy where kids pop their phones in a box when they walk in the door in the morning, because they realize after studying it, it's just not a fair fight. If there are 1,000 engineers trying to make this 1% more addictive on this side and then me on the other, I can't really win that battle consistently. It's better if I don't have it for this part of the day. And then when do they get to have it and things like that. Essentially, what I'm saying is we can involve them in it, and we should apply rules to ourselves too and let them see that it's hard for us and we're also figuring it out and we're all together in this.
Right. And we might fall down on the job too a little
Yeah,
bit. Right. We won't
exactly.
always succeed. We
Yeah.
we we will also possibly sneak a peek at our phones.
Totally. Yeah. I'm thinking of an example where a group of middle school students ran out of the building because they had seen a teacher sneak his phone as he was walking to get
Ah,
coffee, and he had promised to have a no phone day. And they were very serious about enforcing the rule we just agreed to. And that's one of the beauties of middle school too. They have that like righteous sense of justice that can
yeah.
fuel a
I
lot of.
think it's late school. I think it's late school. We're developing that a little bit early because we have a we do goals and commitments every Monday, and we make them public in our cohorts. And at the end of, saying what your goal is, everybody in the group says, "Awesome, we'll hold you to it." And I can't tell you how many times I have been encouraged strongly to do the thing that I said that I was going. Mrs. Mountcastle, you said you're going to learn a new song on the ukulele. Why haven't I seen you with your ukulele this week? Oh, okay.
I love it.
So I think if we've been doing it with the younger kids here, we'll definitely be having some middle school
Yes.
students as we grow into those years. Um, you talk about you use a term that just to be completely honest, I've never heard it used except for in grief counseling,
Hmm.
and the term is companioning. And
Hmm.
listen, I'm a weepy kind of person, but I almost cried at the thought of how powerful that could be with
Hmm.
my kids and with my students.
Yeah.
Um, share a little bit about this idea of what companioning is.
Yeah, I'm trying to, thank you so much for saying that. Offer us like a different mental model for what it is to be an adult around a middle schooler. Because sometimes we fall back on, maybe what we experienced in school, which was an instructor, probably someone who had a bunch of content in their heads trying to get it into our heads. So, way to think about this is, middle schoolers are going on a heroic journey, truly heroic. I mean, can you remember like waking up and your body is different and your emotions are intense and your friendships are changing every second? It is heroic. And if you are someone on a huge heroic adventure and you can have some help, you probably don't want to hire an instructor who's lecturing you every day about during your heroic adventure. You probably want to hire someone closer to like a wilderness guide, someone who knows the territory, but they're not there to just kind of harangue you. They are there to, they'll tell you if you're about to, walk off a cliff, but they're going to also enjoy the experience with you and see what you're interested in and let that drive it as much as is safe. So I think if we ask ourselves, what kind of guide would we want to hire if we were going on, say, a great wilderness trek? The answers that come back are probably pretty close to our job description as a parent of a middle schooler, which is yes, we have authority and experience, but we don't want to hit someone over the head with it. You wouldn't be a very popular wilderness guide if that's what you're doing. You're going to use it when you have to, and the rest of the time, listen a lot, hang back, let them marvel at things, step in only when it's necessary, be ready to laugh and cry with them. That is closer to a companion or a guide, than these older ways of instructing. So it doesn't have to be perfect. We'll all kind of lapse or have something that triggers us a little bit and we can't resist giving them some of our instruction. And we do have a lot to offer. But I think for parents also, it's really important to know that by the time they get to middle school, they have absorbed so much from us. And a lot of it we don't see because we've kind of planted seeds that are waiting for them to be cognitively ready to use them. But we have to trust, like we've had years, tens of thousands of hours pouring in our mindsets and our wisdom. And the fact that they're looking elsewhere for those now and other adults and other peers are interesting to them is not a sign that we failed at all. Like that's actually a sign of our success.
Wow, that's encouraging.
Yeah.
That's really encouraging. I when I think about a good a guide, I think about somebody who is watching to see where I want to go.
Yeah.
Like, there are a lot of different paths to get there. So, back to sort of your mountain guide or your hike leader or whatever, they can say, well, this crowd right here or this kid really wants to be on the blue trail, not the white trail, or
Yeah.
a combination of the blue and white trail. And I think we could make that work.
Exactly. That's
And
it.
it's such an incredible gift for both, right? Like
Yeah.
it's an opportunity to see the trip in a whole different way, in a way that clearly I had never imagined. Or
Same. And I think it can let us relax a little bit. If we feel like we have to manage every single moment of their lives, first of all, they're going to push back on that pretty hard at some point or another. And second, that's just a lot of work. If it's more like we understand some of the traps, and after that, we're just listening. And if they want to take the harder route over there, but it's, not going to hurt them, just a little extra work, then great. Let's do that. Let's see what the view is like from there. I think it's a happier way to be for us
yeah,
too.
or even, I guess, let's make the mistake of choosing a path that's really too hard for us,
Yeah,
and then let's walk back together.
agreed. Yeah,
Even that is so good, right?
yeah. And we can reminisce while we're walking back of here's some times where I totally fell on my face and let ourselves, let's take ourselves off our own pedestals before we get knocked off. We may as
Yeah,
well jump off first.
yeah. And I think like sometimes we're so afraid as parents. We're just afraid, like, oh no, what if this happens? How will I ever help? Or, what terrible thing could happen, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Um,
Agree.
that it causes us to cling more to some rules that might not really be helpful to us.
Yeah, it's like that we have, very rational fears. Your middle schooler wants to borrow the car keys. Okay, your fear is effectively stopping you from you're doing the right thing by following your fear. But then all these irrational fears, imagining, well, if they take this step, 28 steps later, it could lead to X bad outcome. And then
Yes,
we intervene early and they think that we're just an obstacle. But if
yes.
we walk with them, then we'll be able to, in case they do make those 28 steps, we'll be there with them. They'll still be in contact with us as they won't have pushed us away as much. And most likely they're not going to go to that worst case scenario that sits in our brains.
Yep. This is a little bit different from the idea of anchoring that you talk about, but it strikes me that these fears can be anchoring too, like they can hold us
Yes,
back in that way. But
definitely.
you talk about anchoring in a different way. And I hope you'll talk about that a little bit because I have a question about how, not just how we help ourselves as adults kind of move away from anchoring, but how when we see middle school kids in the middle of that anchoring for themselves, how do we help them move along?
That's a great question. Well, okay, maybe I'll take it for the adults first and then fly to kids,
Okay.
just so we understand the idea of it. And yeah, it's a really good one. So the anchoring effect, the concept is that we all tend to value early information more than later information. So we get anchored on that early information, and first impressions are the kind of classic example. And for parents, the challenge is, we've probably known them since their birth or, whenever we came into that family. And so we know them when they were, 6 years old, and we would never let them, walk around town on their own. We knew them, when they didn't have any, ability to figure out danger in a street. And now they're different, but we still have that sense of them that kind of pulls us back and causes us to underestimate them. And meanwhile, middle schoolers know that they're growing by leaps and bounds, and they're in their minds sometimes practically an adult already. And so they're overestimating their capacity for things because they have the hardware capability in their brains to understand a lot, but not the experience. So they're overestimating themselves. So that's where a lot of the tension, I think, between parents and middle schoolers exists, just right there, that sense that we're lowballing and they are overestimating. So first thing I'd say for us adults is that whatever, if their amount of kind of responsibility or freedom feels really comfortable to us, we're probably holding them back because that comfort zone is probably defined by that huge weight of all of the past years of their lives, which don't totally apply to who they are now. So we've got to take a little step out of that most comfortable zone. Doesn't mean total freedom, just means like if we're a little bit uneasy, we're probably actually meeting them where they are developmentally. Um, then from a kid's perspective, so kids can also anchor, they can get stuck in stories about themselves. And that's a really common trap, I think, in middle school that somehow or other they ended up as this kid, the one who is always the jokester or the jock or whatever it might be. And that's not who they are at all, or it's not who they completely are, but people accidentally reinforce the story and kind of put them in a position to keep acting out that role. And I think some of that resolves developmentally as they get older and they notice they can become aware, kind of metacognitive. One of the things that we can do to help, though, is to give them access to different peer groups. So if they're always with their school friends, and that's also who they maybe go to after school with, then that story will follow them everywhere. But if they have, that maybe they do something different in the summer, or they go, to basketball in the afternoons, and it's a totally different group of kids from all over town. That's really healthy for them because they have a chance to restart their identity in each group. And back to that notion of them as identity scientists, it's like now they've got multiple labs running and they can do different experiments and figure
Yeah.
out, okay, actually, I am kind of a jock, but it's not all of me. I'm also the theater kid because I discovered that identity here, and now I'm able to access both of those.
Cool. Cool. All right. So I've just been yammering on about things that I'm curious about and the book club was curious about, but I've gotten a couple of questions here.
Great,
So
great.
let's see. So can you speak to the use of the term lab school? What does lab school mean?
Yeah, yeah. So lab school, there's a history to it that some, very famous progressive educators like John Dewey, probably most famously here, and Maria Montessori, created schools that were intentionally trying to experiment and create something better. Often it means associated with a university. So all of that research in the ivory tower, like let's actually use that because there's a huge problem where education research doesn't get put into practice, as schools can get very stuck. So we kind of took on that label at Millennium School because we wanted to be clear with people. Like, we want to do things differently. We're going to take some thoughtful risks to mix things up a little bit. We have different ideas for schedule, different ideas for curriculum, and some of those are not going to work. And we'll be very transparent about that. But we're going to work with universities. We have 4 university partners and really try to get some research into action because we know how to do better by kids, but there's a lot of momentum to the old way that school has been done. So we found that using that label of lab school just kind of, it was almost like we were trying to give ourselves permission to follow our passion, but give people fair warning. Like, we're not trying to be the same old model of school. We want to do something different. It's not for everyone. If you want to also try something different, then come join us.
Nice, nice. Okay, so the next question from our group here. So can you say more about work that is worthy of them? Balancing topics and skills that just need to be learned with with learning topics that they are most interested in.
Yeah. So I'll come at it maybe again from the neuroscience perspective first. So, there is like a equivalent of a very tall gate between our short-term memory and our long-term memory, because there's all kinds of stuff coming in every day that we forget. And so most of the time our brains are analyzing it and figuring out it's not worth remembering this. Where I left my keys, I wish I remember that, but there are many things that are determined not to be salient. And research is showing that some of the ways that our brains determine what is salient is if they have emotional quality to them and if they are socially connected. So if we have strong emotions about something and we're experiencing it with others, we're much, much more likely to remember it. So connecting that to middle school, most people, if you ask them what they remember about middle school, it is really hard to remember a single academic thing that they learned. But most people can really remember relationships. They remember which teacher really liked them and one didn't like them, their friendships, their struggles, because those things had saliency. They had that emotional and social value that led our brains to say, open the gates. This can go from today's experience into long-term memory and actually shape us. So all of that back to this question of work that's worthy of them. One of the reasons it's so important to find, meaningful projects that either connect to their passion or something in the outside world is that then they actually remember them. As you can come up with the coolest curriculum ever, but if they don't care, if it doesn't have emotional quality and isn't social among their peers, it's in one ear and more or less out the other. So just from a practical perspective, that's what we should do if we want them to remember anything from this time other than their friendships. But also, obviously there's academic potential here too, that if you set projects up that way, they're going to learn much more deeply. It's going to actually shape their sense of how they analyze things, how they discover what's worth doing, when they have their own intrinsic motivation fueling them.
And maybe they'll be less likely to think that learning stops at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, exactly. That
Right?
is,
Like, learning all day long. I'm always learning. We're all always learning.
yeah. Anyone who thinks it stops at 3 o'clock has had an overdose of school and developed an allergy to school.
You might be right. I think you might be right. Yeah. So gosh, so many questions and like just a finite amount of time. I don't want to end before we talk about the importance of the gift of time. So I'm saving that for the end. But I guess we have some questions about so with all this growing happening in our brains and in our bodies for our students, what are some ways that we can support movement and sustenance, right, in the days for these students? Because a lot is needed.
Yeah. So you mean physical movement and
Yeah,
healthy eating and
yeah.
kind of thing.
Beyond, dodgeball.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Maybe I'll start with the eating one first. That I think a lot of middle schools make this mistake of there's not a lot of social time during the day, if any, sometimes. And then you've got this, 23-minute long lunch period. That's kind of the only time you can really choose who you want to hang out with. And so kids often don't eat lunch in middle school, or they just graze because the social need is actually higher in many ways than their need for food. And they're making a logical choice based on this is what their brain is ready to learn the most. If I get 23 minutes of social time, I'm using it to be social and I'll have lunch later. And of course, we know that if they don't eat lunch, they're not going to focus in the next class and all of those other consequences. But so part of the answer there is to have time, enough time to be social, time to move socially, So, sometimes you might resist a traditional gym class because they also just really want to be with their friends. So if they've had more social time and the games are collaborative and social and students have a role in choosing them, then they'll be much more likely to engage. And of course, anytime you get access to the natural world, then that's a whole other kind of amazing experience where, again, there's lots of research showing that being outside lowers our social anxiety. And middle schoolers are prone to a lot of social anxiety for all the reasons we've discussed. So when you're out walking side by side with someone and seeing a beautiful sight or going through a forest, it's much easier to talk to them. You don't have that high stakes face-to-face eye contact mode. So it helps them move and be social, kind of meeting everyone's goals at once. So those are a
Is
few.
that an example of the third thing?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this idea of a third thing is that, it's hard to, sustain that kind of direct eye contact conversation that I think we as adults are sometimes more comfortable with, partly because middle schoolers are just reading so much. They're picking up our facial expressions, they're trying to guess what we are thinking but not saying. And when we are side by side, driving in the car, at a sports game, doing a puzzle together, then first of all, silences aren't as awkward. We've got something else to focus on. And instead of direct comments about you and me, we can make comments about what we're both witnessing. I know a lot of parents that have had the kind of, sex ed talks or relationship talks with their kids by watching shows and commenting on them in real time.
Mhm.
What do you think of that? Or is that a healthy relationship? And that can sometimes be a safer territory than, let's sit down and have this conversation, which will bring the resistance up pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yes. Awesome. So when we're thinking about, at Slate School, we're growing our school, and next year we'll have seventh grade and then eighth grade and beyond. And so we're thinking about a lot of the structures that will be part of our school. And one of the things that we want to think about are some of the rituals.
Hmm.
And I guess I just love to hear from you, like, how important is it to have rituals when you're moving from, say, maybe 6 to 7 or 8 to 9, or can you talk about that? What are some recommendations you might have for that?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, the right amount of rituals, kind of like salting a dish. Like a little bit will go a really long way and becomes essential, and it's also easy to go overboard. But I mean, there are transition rituals. I think there are also beautiful daily rituals that can happen in a school. And in some ways, the ideal thing about a ritual is that it's so familiar. So you can kind of relax into a very known space.
Mhm.
For example, Millennium School every day starts with a morning meeting where the entire school, all 100 plus people, are in one circle. Everyone can see everyone else. Students run it. It always starts with music, then meditation, brief mindfulness led by students, and then students lead a kind of Q&A announcements of the day. And that's something that's so familiar. Kids are kind of mingling in the hallway, then they hear the music come on, they kind of gradually make their way into the gym. They sit down, one of them is on duty each day to lead it, and it relaxes and connects us at the start of the day. And
Love
similarly,
it.
yeah, I think they're, the right amount, ending the school year. One of my favorite rituals at the end of eighth grade at Millennium was students receive in the middle of a camping trip, a letter from some of the adults who are closest to them, parents or grandparents, just saying like, here's what I see in you. Here's who I see you becoming. And there's not a demand. You don't have to respond. The person's not there waiting for you to say something. It's just a letter given to you while you're sitting out in the woods somewhere. And I'm getting chills just telling
I
that story.
know, me too. I'm a little weepy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so that's a
that's
ritual that, yeah, helps them reflect on a moment in life where they're ending one phase of education and leaping into another phase of life.
beautiful, beautiful. So, along those same lines, I don't want to leave this too soon because I also want to know, at Slate School, we have cohorts of 10 students per grade level. But when we move to the upper school, when we move to grade 7, we're open for 5 new students for every cohort. So it's wonderful because we're not going to be living in that that echo chamber. We're not all having had the same experience. But I guess I wonder if you have some advice for us as we welcome students who might not be as familiar with the rituals that have developed over the 5.5 years that we've been here at Slate School, or might not be familiar with, they might be coming from a whole different education environment where, things are much more siloed or whatever. There could be a lot of things that are different. So thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great move to welcome some new students in because that social diversity is really helpful. I think you can count on them to be picking up all these rituals, fast. They're going to be watching really closely. I think back to what we were saying earlier, most important ingredient for them to be able to learn is a sense of belonging. So the faster you can help them feel like there's at least one person here who likes me, who's glad that I'm here,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
see that person every day, if they feel secure in that, then they're going to figure out the rituals. They'll watch them and pick it up pretty quickly. So focus on the belonging first, through advisory, through trips. There are lots of ways you can help to foster that, and then the ritual learning will come easily.
Great. Well, you provided the perfect segue because I want us to talk about advisory because I think it's an off-used term, and I'm afraid it's not often done that well.
Yeah.
So I guess, help us envision advisory as it could be.
Yeah, so advisory is, first of all, just about my favorite thing in education. I think it's so full of potential. And when it
Yes.
works well, it really is the heart of the school. It's the place where you have unconditional belonging and really you make sense of what it is to be an adolescent together. Of course, normally advisory is kind of like a boring homeroom study hall time. So that's often people think, really, advisory could be something else, and it can. I think at Millennium, that's a good example of it. So in my mind, the ideal advisory is a group that is together for all of middle school. So they kind of loop over multiple years. And
Hmm?
just knowing that the relationships are going to last long causes everybody to just kind of invest in those versus, wait for something to switch out. Small enough that you feel like people aren't really hiding. It's kind of, we can all see each other. So 8 to 10, I think is a really nice size. And, one adult, and that adult is not an instructor. And that adult is a facilitator, which means your job is to make this a safe space so that kids can bring up what they want to bring up. And if that's, I'm stressed about XYZ, academic thing, or I have a crush and I don't know what to do about it, or my mom is driving me crazy, or whatever it is that they feel like I can bring that here. The adult is not going to jump in and suddenly intervene unless it's, small set of real safety issues, but otherwise they're listening. Um, Other peers feel comfortable. They can offer some advice. They can offer their empathy. And it's social emotional learning, but done in a way that's experiential. So instead of saying, today class we're going to learn conflict resolution, it's like, oh, you're having a conflict. So what are some ways we've worked through conflicts? Who has ideas on this? And, here's a tool you might try. And that's when they're ready to learn it.
It's so respectful,
Yeah. Yeah. How about that? School
right?
is so
And I don't know why that seems
yeah,
surprising,
I
but
know. I
it's
know.
horrible that it seems surprising,
I know.
right?
I know. Yeah.
It's like crediting kids with actual learning that they could share with each other. Why is that a stretch?
I know. They're really wise. Like I often working with middle school, especially in advisory, I hear the things they say to each other to support each other, ask questions, offer empathy. And I just think like in middle school, I don't know if I could have done that. Like I think I was pretty dumb, but I look at them and I think there's maybe something about this generation or kids who have the space to actually talk about their emotions and not have that be, shamed or repressed. I think there are many things that make me optimistic about the world because of seeing how kids are growing up. And I know that's a message that's probably not said that often, but I think this generation has got a lot of wisdom to offer.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. I mean, why else would we be in this business,
Yeah,
right? It,
exactly.
education is just not a place for skeptical people, for people who
Mhm.
don't, who aren't optimistic. I don't know about skeptical, but pessimistic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
You could be skeptical. You can say, like, I really want I want the evidence for that,
yeah,
but you can't be, I don't believe there's any evidence for that.
I
Right.
think that's right. Yeah, yeah. You're working
Um,
with people who are transforming right in front of you. So
yes.
really hold that, really remember what that feels like and what that means.
Yeah. And be open to that kind of personal transformation yourself.
Yes.
Because I
And that
think that's
fulfills.
available to us. It's
Yes.
available. Right? To have
So
your
true.
eyes open. It's the saddest thing I think I ever see is humans, young or old, who have lost the ability to be awestruck.
Yeah. Well
Right?
said.
There's
Well
so
said.
much to be, and not to use the word awesome. There's just so much to be awestruck about.
I agree.
I have to just hold up a page from your book, 2 pages,
Mm.
maybe. Wait, there's actually 3 pages, but I won't put them all. This is the Essential Experiences Project.
Mm.
And when I read this, um, it gave me goosebumps,
Mm.
and it reminded me that there are so many things on this list that I have never done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's, listen, if you don't have this book, you need to go get it. Even if you just have it for these pages, start small. Just open to this and start reading it for yourself and understand how life-changing it is
Mm.
to rethink your experience a little bit. Um, can you talk about how this happened? How did this happen?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So Essential Experiences Project, we were designing Millennium School and trying to figure out what really matters, what would actually be remembered. And we just started asking everyone we knew, what do you remember from middle school? And, that's positive, that still shapes you now as an adult. And then we started to ask high schoolers, and then we asked middle schoolers too. And we came up with this kind of ever-growing list. I forget how many are in the book, 50 something, and it's even grown
Tell you,
since the book came out.
I can tell you, yeah, 55. You
And
must
it's
have stopped at that number intentionally, because I'm sure you could have gone.
yeah, there could be a lot more. But the
Yes.
idea is like, we spend so much time stressing about, getting from A to B in our math curriculum or all these different sequences. But what about experiences like, I figured out how to resolve a conflict with a friend, or I started keeping a journal for the first time. For me, that was one of the best things in middle school. I still keep a journal to this day, and it started then. Or, I started a business. I cooked food for my family. I cooked dinner for the first time ever. These are some of the experiences on there that all come from someone saying, like, this is the thing I remember, and it still shapes me. It's still giving me some life now, 5, 10, 50 years after. So it's just a way to reorient ourselves toward maybe what matters at least as much as the academics and possibly more, depending on how you see
Well,
it.
it struck me as like every single thing here makes me better at academics.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
nothing here and there are some things that I think are highly academic, like deconstruct an advertisement,
Yeah, that's a
right?
fun one. Yeah.
Yeah. Learn a new language, lead a group, learn about an unfamiliar religion, learn how to be an active listener. All of these things, we've been working on a portrait of a graduate here, and we're feeling really good about it.
Mm.
And it feels like all of these things are part of it,
Yeah.
and should be are really important, critical milestones in our lives. And just, the last one, the current last one is write a personal credo. Just
Mm.
like so powerful, and especially powerful for somebody, of the age we're talking about.
Yeah. Thinking of accompaniment, since you mentioned that earlier, I think some of my happiest moments with middle schoolers have been sitting with them when they've taken on that challenge and they want to write something that kind of sums up who they want to be, that's short and punchy. It's really beautiful to be with someone who's just starting to figure themselves out. And they're never going to be done, but what they realize now might really kind of send them in a particular direction. Yeah, it's one of the beautiful things, parenting or teaching this age.
Yeah. And maybe it's this idea of the evolving personal credo, right?
Definitely.
Right. So it's every year, maybe it's a revisit, or when something enormous happens. We have these learning journey boxes in our fifth and sixth grade classroom. The kids have made them. They hang up on the wall. And when they've reached a milestone of some kind, they put some artifact in there or some little bit of writing that sort of, says this is what's happened here. And it was a big moment for me. And it could be anything, really, anything.
On that.
All right, so you have a whole chapter called the generosity with time.
Mm,
And I feel like if there's a heart to all of this work, it only happens when we sort of stop looking at the clock.
yeah. So, so true.
So maybe you could share a little bit about that chapter just for us, because I do think that's the work that we can all be doing all the time from right now. From we don't
Yeah.
have to have any special training at all. We just can start doing that now.
Yeah, I think thinking about how we relate to time is it's an unlock for a lot of this. And this chapter came about, I think, first and foremost, my struggles as a parent, when I realize that I'm rushing my kids all the time, quick, gotta get that done or get to the next thing, or we don't have time to work on that anymore. And I just hate when I end up in that mode where I'm kind of breaking some state of flow or concentration they're in because of some other, probably adult need that I'm trying to get them to do. And as an educator, I mean, schools have a really weird relationship with time. And you can tell often when you look at a school schedule and it's like, class gets out at 1:18 and the school day's over at 3:02. It's like
Oh,
that doesn't make any sense. Like people don't follow time to the seconds. That's a machine style of learning. Humans aren't like that. So if you want people to be like that, you'd have to make them incredibly anxious about time all the time to live in that system, which is, I think schools do that to us. They make us stressed about time, feel like time is scarce,
yeah.
and that we're kind of beholden to it rather than letting it flow and even forgetting about it. So a lot in that chapter is about whether we're thinking about it as a parent, how do we just release some control over time? Or as a school, like could we create these more generous stretches of time? Forget the 23-minute lunch or the 48-minute block. Like let's have several hours to go into a project. And then let's have some time, depending on the age of the students, that's maybe less structured, where they can make some choices on their own what to do with it and what they need. Maybe it's shooting hoops, maybe it's hanging out with their friends, reading a book. So time, relates a lot to trust, I think, that we're in this cycle where we feel less and less, availability of time and less trust that others can use it well. And if we start to, unpeel, take that in reverse a little bit, we start to realize like, kids often make good choices when we give them some time. How about that? And they need time to figure out what kinds of choices really matter to them and who they're becoming to make some interesting mistakes and then have time to reflect on those versus go to the next thing. So, yeah, the heart of a lot of what we're talking about is becoming generous with time.
Not easy. That's not easy
Not easy.
work.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I think it's life-changing work, and I'm certainly not done with it. I feel like I've internalized this loud clock, in my years of schooling, and I'm really trying to turn the volume down on that.
Well, we're also still part of the world,
Yeah, yeah,
and the world asks a lot of our time, uh, right?
true.
And
Yeah,
so maybe as adults, just resisting that a little bit is not such a bad thing.
I would agree. Yeah.
I used to say about my mother-in-law, God rest her soul, that she was on a different kind of time.
Hmm.
She just lived, and if she was a little bit late, then that's when the party started.
Yeah.
Mm.
I
You
love.
know,
Yeah.
and it was elegant, really. And she was beloved, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We don't have to punish kids who have that natural kind of free flow of time. I think there are parts of it that are personality, where some people are naturally more driven to follow the clock. And great, they can be that person, but everybody who is not shouldn't be forced all the time. Obviously, there are moments where we need to have starts and ends and rendezvous, but I think we go pretty overboard with it in our society.
Yeah, and it's just not, it can't be uniform,
Yeah,
right? It's like we talk here a lot about, how many opportunities do you need to find a competency at this, to master this? It's a different number than I need for that. I need more opportunities in this area, and I need fewer opportunities over here. And we're all kind of trying to suss out what we need in order to satisfy what we're trying to do.
exactly. Yeah, sameness is not a great goal. And a lot of this is about trying to have us move down the assembly line at the same exact time. But I think authenticity is a much better goal, and it speaks to the middle school heart, I think, pretty well.
Well, I'm going to be absolutely authentic when I say I'm so grateful to you for spending this time with us tonight. It's just really such a gift, such
Oh,
a real gift, and so wonderful for us in this sort of formative stage of our school's growth. I hope you'll come and visit.
I would
Uh,
love to. Thank
it's not that far, really. Oh, well, you go places. You go to Japan. Come on.
It's a lot closer than that.
Yeah, it's the other direction, but that's okay.
Yep, it's all good.
Yeah, we would love it. Come and visit us, and we wish you so much good in your new school and with all of your endeavors. And I wish you well as a parent too.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to
You're
be
you're
with
on
you.
you're on a great adventure.
Thank you. And you are too. Such a beautiful moment to be starting a new school, especially in the middle school years where we really need to change this story. So wishing you huge good luck and can't wait to see it in action.
Thank you. We've got wonderful young people here. So
Believe
I
it.
think we're going to make a go of it.
Beautiful. Thank you again for
All
having me.
right, Chris, thank you. And thank you to all who participated today. Thanks for your questions. And I'll say so long, just as we often do here at Slate School. Send everybody some positive rice. Positive rice.
I
Positive.
love that.
Take
Thank you.
care.